Welcome back to Signature Song, a podcast where every episode two friends come together to discuss a different musical artist and try to answer the question, what is this artist's signature song? A question that is sometimes not as straightforward as you might think. My name is Jorge,
And I'm Lane.
and last episode we went back to the late 90s and we analyzed the songs and the career of Britney Spears. And this time around for our second episode, we're going to stay in the 90s, but go a little further back to the start of the decade and the rise of a musical movement that took the world by storm. We're going to talk about a band that saw monumental commercial success. They were hailed as one of the leading voices of a generation. No strangers to controversy. Some of their peers even accusing them as careerists and overly commercial. But a band that also played a big part in bringing us, the two of us, together as friends. Do you remember our first ever interaction?
I do. It was on LiveJournal, and there was a community called Life is a Song, and folks could post song lyrics that I guess pertain to what they were going through at the time. It was sort of like vague posting about your emotional
That's
state.
exactly
And
vague posting through lyrics.
right. And I posted part of the song Black off of
Mm-hmm.
10,
Yeah,
and Jorge was mocking Eddie Vedder,
yeah.
and I took things a little too seriously then, and I got a little defensive, and then he added me on LiveJournal, and
A-
and the
And we
rest is
started
history.
and we started talking about music, and it's a conversation that, over 20 years later is still still going.
Yes.
Yeah, it is. We're talking about Pearl Jam, and Pearl Jam, there's something about Pearl Jam that is so easy to make fun of, and I hope people don't take offense to that. I mean, there are two elements at play, I think. There's an open-heartedness, sort of an over earnestness in some cases to Pearl Jam, where their especially their earlier work is extremely emotional. And they're also extremely distinctive, and this is because, of course, of Eddie Vedder's voice is a big part of it, and also his interesting intonation and pronunciation sometimes.
Mhm.
Um, but the fact that I made fun of you would or that I made fun of Eddie Vedder at that time, doesn't mean that I wasn't a fan. Pearl Jam is a big band in my life. Pearl Jam is a band that I would put in a small group of bands that I was extremely into at one point, like heavily, heavily into. And because of that, because of the level of minutia that I learned about the band during that period, they will forever be part of my life. Even if these days I don't really listen to them that often, their newer stuff doesn't speak to me that much. There is a specific period of Pearl Jam output between 1994 and 2005. So between Vitalogy and the Riot Act album, and specifically the release of a single called Man of the Hour, that I will always think of that as the end of my favorite period of Pearl Jam music, which is the middle years. And by this point, it's no longer the middle. It's already well past the middle. But those are the albums that I can still enjoy and that I will always love. I still really like some songs in 10 and Versus, but the stuff that really speaks to me is the stuff that they made after that and before their big commercial comeback in the mid 2000s. What is your history with Pearl Jam? Are you a big fan?
I wouldn't call myself a big fan, but I will say that they were formative, in terms of my own creative output. I'm a songwriter, for those of y'all listening. And, trying to think, I probably, though, the first song that I remember hearing by them, was actually their cover of Last Kiss.
That was a
Um,
big one.
yeah, and I remember liking it a lot, but I was, pretty small when it came out. But the next song that I really remember making an impact on me was, seeing the music video for Jeremy
Mhm.
on VH1's pop-up video. And I remember the video for Jeremy really, impacting me. I had a pretty difficult time in school, and so this song about a kid who was, bullied to the point of suicide in front of his class really struck a nerve with me,
Ooh.
and a couple of years later at a flea market, my my dad bought me the 10 CD. It was like a dollar 50, and this, like, massive stack of used CDs that this guy had come with, and
Mhm.
I listened to it nonstop. Uh, it really had a big impact on me, and so my favorite album of theirs is always gonna be 10.
10 is a huge album. It's a generational album, and when we talk about signature song, what is an artist's signature song? It's very easy to stick to their early stuff sometimes because in a lot of cases it's the stuff that made that artist notable in the first place, right? When we ask the question, what is a signature song? We are really asking what is the song that defines this band to the general public. And there are very few bands that you can find that have an album that basically eclipses the rest of their career to the general public, like Pearl Jam does with 10. 10 is a huge album. And so, yes, I'm going to give away the fact that most of our picks, most of our contenders for the question of Pearl Jam's signature song are going to be songs from 10. Even though, like I said earlier, it is not my favorite album by Pearl Jam. I like a lot about it, and we're going to talk about some of those things. But my personal recommendation to you as an album that I still think you would appreciate with everything that you've grown to like as a music listener and all the different styles and influences that you can appreciate, pick up No Code, 1996, Pearl Jam No Code. It's the album that effectively marked the end of Pearl Jam's commercial peak and essentially retreated them from the spotlight. It was sort of a self-conscious effort to retreat a little bit and to make something a little more idiosyncratic and weird and incorporating elements of garage rock and Middle Eastern music and folk, more of a Neil Young kind of sound in some places. I think you'd dig it. It's a good album. Have you ever listened to it?
I haven't. I've heard it's really good. I think so the albums that I have of theirs besides 10 are Versus, Binaural, and I think, oh god, Yield. And so
Okay.
I kinda missed No Code in
Yeah,
there,
yeah.
but I've heard it's very experimental and
Yeah.
definitely a little bit different than those.
Beyond how experimental it is, I also just think the songs are really good, you know? Yes, they incorporate a lot of different musical elements that weren't there at the start of the career, but the songs are just really good too. And you mentioned Yield. I actually put Yield and No Code side by side. I think they're both fantastic albums, and I think they share a lot of elements, but Yield is definitely more of an outward looking album than No Code. No Code is very introspective. In any case, the the signature song contenders are not coming from No Code. Spoilers. We're gonna talk about some songs that
Nor Yield.
are or Yield for that matter. But let's talk about what songs potentially define Pearl Jam to the general public. So, shall we go into the contenders?
Yeah, let's go for it.
Alive, the song that started it all. Pearl Jam's first single. Not only was it their first single, but it also was one of the very first songs they worked on as Pearl Jam. Of course, the big story is the Pearl Jam rose from the ashes of Mother Love Bone. Everybody knows this after the death of Andrew Wood. Guitarist Stone Gossard put together a tape containing some demos. That tape eventually made its way to Californian surfer Eddie Vedder. Eddie Vedder went surfing, wrote some lyrics, wrote some lyrics in his head while he was shredding the gnar, and and catching big waves. And one of those songs was Alive, and that is the song that started everything. The version from it was the lead single from 10. It was produced by Rick Parshar, who also worked with artists like Temple of the Dog, of course, a Pearl Jam related project, Blind Melon. and as we mentioned, lyrics by Eddie Vedder over music by Stone Gossard. Now, this is an interesting song. It's extremely powerful. The chorus is not only is it catchy, but it also is rousing. It's stirring. It's a song that packs a big punch. And I think this is a song that really captures the early style of Pearl Jam very perfectly. Like, it's a great showcase for what makes Pearl Jam, early Pearl Jam, sound like Pearl Jam. It's got that grandeur, that feeling, that, mid tempo sort of swing to it, and it's got the big guitar solo at the end. It's a guitar solo that has become extremely iconic on its own. How do you feel about Alive?
I find this song, a little, discomforting. The lyrics are pretty disturbing to me in the
Yeah.
song. Um, there's this kind of Oedipus complex thing going on in the lyrics, and talking about the Mama San trilogy. The other 2 songs, Once and Footsteps, when you put them together, they kind of, I guess, make sense to me as a
Yeah.
trilogy. To me, that they don't seem very linked superficially. I will
Mhm.
say that I prefer Once, if I were to choose between Alive and Once, from 10, which of the songs I think are the best, but there is something powerful about it. The guitar solo is really powerful. It was based on a Kiss song,
Mhm.
which, that apparently Ace Frehley stole from Robbie Krieger from, The Doors' song 5 to 1.
Mhm.
So it's kind of a classic rock sort of, influenced jam, but it's a lot heavier,
Yeah.
than I think a lot of stuff that was really on the radio at the time, both, like, lyrically and sonically.
Yeah. You mentioned the Mama San trilogy, so let's dig into that a little bit for those who don't know. So, as we mentioned, this is part of a 3-song demo that was recorded by Stone Gossard, and the songs that would become Once, Alive, and Footsteps. And when Ed wrote the lyrics to those songs, he sort of created this underlying narrative throughout these 3 songs. And it's an interesting story, but it's also a really weird one. I was always a little weirded out by the fact that Ed incorporated an autobiographical element, the fact that he didn't find out who his real father was until after his real father had died. He took that starting point, that very dramatic starting point, and the guilt associated with, like, okay, well, I'm still alive. And then he sort of turned that into this longer story that involves incest. But, whatever. Art is art. People are free to make whatever weird stories they want. And then in the story, the singer or the protagonist finds out that the person he knew his whole life as his father was not actually his father. His real father is dead. And then he becomes involved in a sort of sexual relationship with his mother, and then they go on a killing spree together. This is extremely 90s. This is extremely edge lord, extreme, dark, dark, dark 90s. And then the last song, sorry, the killing spree, I think, is the song Once. It's about that. And then
Yes.
the trilogy ends with Footsteps, which I don't actually know that how that plays into the story.
I don't either, so
Okay.
don't ask me.
Okay. I think Footsteps might be the sad denouement of the story. So it's an interesting starting point for a band like Pearl Jam. Uh, I don't think people talk enough about what a strange story that is, but in any case, the song seems to have completely grown past those that starting point. It seems to have taken on a new meaning, and it's become this cathartic, almost victorious, anthemic declaration of, I don't know, resilience. I'm still alive. We're still here. It seems to be the way the song has evolved over time, and it seems to be the way that fans take it when they're, punching their fists along to that song on during a live concert.
Have you seen them live?
I've seen them live twice. I saw them live in 2005 and I saw them in 2013. They're I mean, Pearl Jam is a live band. They've really developed a reputation as a live band, and it's earned. They're really good live performers. Okay, so that's a live. Should we move on to the next contender?
Sounds good. So the next song that we're going to talk about is Even Flow, and this is another single off of 10. It's the second single,
Mm-hmm.
so going chronologically in order after Alive. And guitarist Stone Gossard, who also co-wrote Alive and Black, co-wrote this song with Eddie. It is a song that was pretty successful
Yeah,
across the world, and in the United States especially. It reached number 3 on the Billboard mainstream rock charts and was the number 5 most played song in mainstream American rock radio in the 2010s.
right,
So I guess it had a little bit of a comeback in the
for sure.
previous decade. But yeah, this song is, I believe it's about homelessness, right?
Yeah.
It's one of the first socially conscious songs that I remember making an impact on me. Not many mainstream songs are about homelessness and mental illness, so it's
Hmm.
kind of an interesting departure from what was on the radio at the time.
Yeah, yeah, for
What do you
sure.
think, Jorge?
Well, a couple things to talk about. Number one, yeah, this song was another hit for Pearl Jam. Actually, the last contender, Alive, was not an immediate hit. Like it took a while for it to start catching on. There's another song later in this countdown or later in this list of contenders that really propelled the band to superstardom. But Even Flow was not it, and Alive was not it. They were still building their audience and they were growing gradually. And you mentioned that this is one of the most played songs from the 2010s. Do you know why?
I mean, I know that they did a remaster of the 10 album, but I'm not sure
They
if there was
did.
something else.
They did do a remaster of the 10 album, but that's not why. I'm going to tell you, and this is a few days ago. I was at work and talking to a colleague, and I was telling him about this episode that we were going to record. And I asked him, "So, what do you think is Pearl Jam's signature song?" And without hesitation, he said "Even Flow." And the reason
Hmm.
is he is 26 years old. The video game Rock Band was a formative part of his life and of his music listening habits. And he learned of Pearl Jam through Rock Band. And Even Flow
Hmm.
is apparently a very popular song on Rock Band. So this gave the song a second win commercially. This is just my theory. I don't actually know that it correlates perfectly, but I think that's it. And he told me that everybody he knows, the only Pearl Jam song they know is Even Flow. Even Flow is huge. We talked about Pearl Jam being a live band and having this reputation for being a great live band and great live performers. Even Flow is a big part of it. Even Flow is a song that morphs into this long jam session with Mike McCready giving it his all and the rest of the band too. Like everybody's jamming their hearts out on stage and every version is a little different. And this also fostered this sort of collector's mentality in among Pearl Jam fans where, how was the even flow? That's one of the questions that you get after you see Pearl Jam. How was the even flow for that show?
Really?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Because every version is a little different, and some involve a drum solo, and some just involve a crazy guitar solo, and sometimes they incorporate elements from other songs. It's this big sprawling thing. In a lot of ways, has become synonymous with Pearl Jam. There are a few different versions of Even Flow. I mean, aside from the million live versions, I think this is their most played live song. There are also a couple different studio versions. There's a version that was on 10, which by all accounts was a nightmare to record. And then there's a version that is on the music video, and is also the same version that's on their greatest hits album, which was a 1992 re-recording. Apparently, they were not happy with the version that ended up in 10. And listening to both versions back to back, I mean, at least I was a little confused as to why, because they're not that different. There's a few differences, but there's actually not that many that I think would require a re-recording. The original one uses a lot of preverb, the preverb effect where you reverse a vocal track and then you apply reverb to the reversed vocal track, and then you reverse it back so that the reverb seems to come in before the voice. It gives this weird kind of ghostly sound to it.
I'm not familiar with that. Like, that
Yeah.
was the first time I've ever heard anybody describe it, so
Essentially, you're adding an echo or a reverb effect to a reversed vocal, and then when you reverse it back to the original, it sounds like the a ghostly kind of otherworldly voice in the background coming in before the actual vocal comes in. There's a lot of that in the original 10 version. They scaled that way back with the re-recorded version, and also the second version, the single version, features drums by their, at the time, current drummer Dave Abruzzese, who does a little bit more flashy cymbal things and hits the drums a little harder than the album drummer, which I believe was Dave Cruson. So cool difference there, a cool experiment listening to both back to back and finding all the different differences between the tracks. Another difference that I noticed between the two, the 10 version, during the guitar solo, there's a very faint spoken word section in the middle where Ed is pretending to be a homeless man and asking for a dollar. You can barely hear it. The only reason I heard it is because I isolated the vocal track with software. But he goes like, "Hey man, you got a dollar? You got a dollar?" And then in the re-recorded version, it ends with a spoken word section by Ed where he says, and this I wrote it down. He says, I died, and you just stood there. I died and you watched. I died and you walked by and said no thanks. I'm dead." So really hammering home the homelessness topic, or the
Hmm.
homelessness theme that's part of the song.
In terms of the actual song itself, like, the performance, it's very menacing,
Mm-hmm.
right? Like, it's definitely kind of, like, there's an intensity to the guitar and the vocals especially. I find, like, this to be one of Ed's greatest vocal performances that I know
Yeah.
of.
Yeah.
I think it's a really fantastic song, from its sound. I will say that I feel that, even though it was one of the first, like I said, socially conscious songs that had an impact on me, I find it a little heavy-handed now.
Mm.
Think it's a little much.
Yeah. I think so too. But Pearl Jam were not exactly known for being subtle at the time
No.
or
No,
nowadays.
that's
And I guess another potential reason why Even Flow could be considered Pearl Jam's signature song is that I do think a lot of the general public is informed by comedy, and there are few music related comedy bits as recognizable as Adam Sandler performing as Opera Man and singing a version of Even Flow that is just mumbling. It's also one of my favorite things, and I think in a lot of ways informed why people would go on to make fun of Eddie Vedder's vocals for a decade.
yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
Okay, let's move on to our next contender.
Jeremy.
Jeremy
Yeah,
spoke in class today.
yes. I mentioned earlier that I saw this song on pop-up video, and I just remember what an impact it had on me, the imagery in the video, the things like black and white images of this boy, right? And then,
Mm-hmm.
like, his pictures that he talks about in the opening lyrics about him being at home drawing and everything. I mean, this whole hot song tells, like, this story, like, there's
Yeah.
this clear narrative arc, and it was based on a true story.
Mhm.
This kid committed suicide, in front of his class,
Yeah. And I think
and
maybe Ed saw an article about that. It said, "Ooh, that's a good song idea."
yeah, I mean, I guess he just kind of picked up on that, but he also, I think he knew a kid growing up or something like that who committed school shooting.
Damn.
Yeah,
Okay. So that's been going on for a while, huh?
yeah, unfortunately, and I think around the time that I first saw it actually was probably the same year as Columbine.
Mm.
So I think maybe the song kind of got like a new life in kind of a weird way here
Yep.
in the US, once that happened, but, it's a great song.
Yeah, this is the one. This is the one that really propelled them. As much as, Alive was being played on the radio and the Even Flow was also making the rounds, I think Jeremy and its corresponding music video was huge for the band. Definitely much more cultural penetration abroad than either of the two previous contenders we mentioned. By which I mean I grew up without ever hearing Even Flow or Alive, but I definitely heard Jeremy because the music video that got played on MTV Latin America all the time. I think the music video for this is a huge part of why Pearl Jam became as popular as they did. Even though, again, great band with a lot of great songs. When you are part of people's homes, when people see you in their home, by which I mean their living room TVs, there's an extra layer of memorability. And I think this song really stuck with people because of in large part because of the music video. It's also a really cool song. Like if you listen to it, just listen to the music. It's very unusual. It's not like a riff based jam like Even Flow is, or even a chordal jam like Alive is. It's very strange. It's built around a bass line, and it seems like everything the guitars are doing, they're doing around that main bass riff. The bass riff is the propelling motion, carries a song forward. And of course, adds vocals as well. He sounds like the lyrics read. He sounds pained. He sounds anguished. And it's a very compelling, emotional performance by everybody involved.
Musically, it's very like you said, it's very interesting. It's Mixolydian, and so it kind of has this sort of, like, quality to it that I think a lot of at the time, like, popular rock music wasn't venturing into.
Mhm.
Um And that bass and the bass chords in particular are so just unforgettable. But it sounds very, like, harmonically and sonically full, I
Yeah.
think.
It's a 12-string bass.
Yeah. Then that gives you some of that microtonal stuff too then. It's really
Mhm.
cool.
Yeah. And when you listen to the isolated bass line, which has been made available, it's surprising just how much is going on. Like, definitely, just by hearing it, you know that it's a song that's carried by the bass. But when you actually listen to the isolated bass, you're like, oh my god, there's all these really beautiful harmonic flourishes that Jeff is doing, just with the bass. And because it's a 12-string bass, there are these really very pretty, almost glassy tones that he's achieving throughout the song, and that taken in isolation, really open your eyes to just how much of the harmonic richness of the song comes from that bass. It's really cool, and one of the things that really made me respect the song even more than I already did. I already knew this is an outlier for Pearl Jam. It doesn't really sound like anything else they ever did. It's a very unusual song. It doesn't sound like anything else any other band from this movement ever did. Very unusual song that is also extremely memorable. And I think most people that I know would point to Jeremy as being their signature song.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a supremely good song, and I mean, I it's my favorite Pearl Jam song, probably.
Nice. Okay, let's move on to our next contender.
I wanna see them on a portion letter. Let me see. I wanna leave it again.
Yellow Lead Better is a song that is not part of 10, so we are officially out of the 10 track listing. However, it was recorded during the 10 sessions. It was apparently a very early band composition that didn't make it into the final album, but was included as a track on the Jeremy single, which again was a very popular single, so that played a part in this B-side, this outtake, becoming popular among fans. Yellow Lead Better is a strange song. It occupies a special place in Pearl Jam's oeuvre. It also serves as their farewell song. They play this at the end of a lot of concerts. So that opening riff has sort of become synonymous with, okay, guys, the show's over. It almost reminds me of the backing band in Saturday Night Live playing while the host is saying goodbye to everybody. It has a very, kind of cozy, let's all hug it out feel to me, at least. I don't know. How do you feel about Yellow Lead Better?
Well, I learned recently that the lyrics are actually supposed to be mostly nonsense, or at
Yeah.
least when they're completely, improvised, and I mean, it does have a jam band quality to it, so I can see how it was something that they sort of just were fiddling around with in the studio, and then it became, a B-side. I think this song is sort of like if, South Park or Family Guy did, like, a skit, and they made a they were making fun of Pearl Jam. This is what the song would sound like.
Do you mean because of the incomprehensible vocals or the music?
Both, I
Mm.
think. I think that the, incomprehensibility of the words and the way that Ed delivers the lines or whatever, it sounds like a stereotypical Pearl Jam song, in a way, and it's also, like, a big fan favorite, which is kind of
Mm.
interesting to me because, I don't know, I find it a little silly, to be honest
Yeah.
with you, even though it's supposed to be, the lyrics that people have, like, I guess, applied to it retroactively, um, there's a lot of angst in them,
Mm.
not unlike their other songs, but about not fitting in, I
Mhm.
think, about his, like, older brother dying in war or something like that, and then feeling so isolated from everybody, at his school. I mean, this seems to be a recurring theme at this point,
Yeah.
right? This anguish white male alienation, uh,
Mhm.
that Ed is sort of tapping into.
Yeah. I feel that. I understand what you're saying. I think it's a very interesting take. To me, the song feels very nostalgic. There's something about it that I find very almost dreamy. The melody is sort of bright. It's a very simple song musically, but it's delivered with gusto, and it's definitely it has a sentimentality to it that I really like. One of the very few phrases we can actually make out is, "Oh, can you see them?" You know, but they don't wave. There's something kind of like a half remembered dreamy memory kind of feel to that. And yeah, like you said, the song as originally recorded is Ed just sort of babbling. I don't know if they just decided not to re-record the vocals after laying down the guide vocal, which is a legit songwriting technique. Just kind of
Mhm.
babble away and then write something that fits the meter later. But they just skipped that last part. Later on during their live performances, Ed has actually been putting in actual words in some of these songs, and during the 2003 tour, I think he was really making the songs about the Iraq War. It became charged with anti-war messaging and meaning, and you know lines like, I don't know if I'll see him in a box or a bag, again relating to the troops. Uh, but I don't think that was the original intention. I think that was applied to the song later, and I think it just kind of evolved that way. I will also mention that even though it's a very simple song musically, to me, one of the pleasures of this song and the reason I really like it is hearing Mike McCready sort of deploy his bag of tricks with this very, very simple chord progression. He really twists it into something very expressive. Does he go for the wah pedal? Does he do some harmonic stuff every once in a while? Does he play the chords? There's moments where he's playing the chords real up close to the neck, so it gives it that soft, sort of soft feeling. There's something very cool about hearing him just kind of ply his craft. Is that an expression? Ply his craft?
Yeah,
Um,
yeah. No, but there is this definite, like, sort of relaxed almost guitar work,
yeah.
right? Like he seems to be he seems to it's coming easy to him, you
Yeah.
know?
And those little touches, like let me go up to the harmonics, let me go up an octave. It's just like he's finding different ways to make this very basic chord progression sound interesting and emotional and evocative. So I like Yellow Lead better. I don't think I agree with you that this would be like this is the epitome of what Pearl Jam would sound like to an outsider, because to me it lacks the darkness. There's a lot of darkness in Pearl Jam's music, a lot of like deep-seated angst in the music itself, and this is a relatively bright song and sort of a laid-back song. So to me, it's missing that menacing feeling. But I know exactly what you're saying though, and why you say it.
Did we talk about too that it's like pretty culturally significant?
That's right. It is. I mean, one of the things you got to ask about these potential signature songs is did they play a part in any important pop culture moments? And Yellow Lead Better definitely did.
Yeah, so this song is featured in the finale of the television program Friends.
Hmm.
Um, it's the
A
first
huge
time.
moment. A huge
Yeah,
moment.
like I don't think Pearl Jam had put their music in a movie or in a TV show up to that point, but this is like this massive cultural moment
Yeah,
of this, the show is like really a phenomenon.
absolutely.
Um, at least to
It-
certain audiences, right? Like middle class, 30 something white people.
yeah. And I think it sort of signals the official end of the 90s, even though I think when Friends wrapped up, the 90s were pretty well over by that point. But it does, there's a finality to Friends wrapping up with Yellow Lead Better. It makes sense to me.
I have to imagine that this is like so I'm not a Friends person.
I don't
I've
have friends. I don't like friends. I don't make friends. I don't want them.
No. No, so I've only seen the show like a handful of times, but I have to imagine that um this is a pretty evocative and compelling song for people of a certain generation, maybe people about 10 years older than me,
Hmm.
10, 15 years older than me who really like resonated, like that show really resonated with them.
Okay, let's move on to the next contender, and that is
Don't call me daughter, not fit to. The picture kept will remind me. Don't call me daughter, not fit to be. The
Daughter.
picture kept
We are
will remind
finally out of the 10 era, but we're only a couple of years later in the Versus era, because our next contender is a song from Versus, and it's probably the most popular song on Versus, Pearl Jam's follow-up album. This song was produced, like the rest of Versus, by Brendan O'Brien, who would sort of become Pearl Jam's de facto go-to producer for the rest of the decade. And it was released as the second single from Versus. It shows a different side of the band. It's acoustic based. It's the first acoustic based song I think that most people heard of Pearl Jam's. I mean, not counting their actual MTV Unplugged, which was pretty big, I think, the previous year. And it's a really interesting song. Again, sort of laid back, not very aggressive, but very evocative and built around this really pretty acoustic guitar riff. I think it's an open G, and you can sort of hear how Eddie took that acoustic riff and started building the melody out of it, because it really does feel very integrated to the guitar riff itself. And it presents this sort of oblique story, potentially about abuse, potentially about sadness, childhood depression. I'm not actually sure what it's about, but it's a very catchy chorus and it's a very melodic song. How do you feel about Daughter?
To me, it always felt a lot like Jeremy Part 2,
Hmm.
but from the perspective of a girl. I definitely see kind of like the child abuse theme running through that. Um, I think that it's a pleasant enough song, but I feel very unfulfilled by this song and a lot of songs on Versus, because I always felt like Versus was kind of just like a bunch of outtakes from 10.
Hmm.
Like I feel like almost every song, like, you could match them up to another one on 10. And
Hmm.
for me, each time the 10 song would come out on top. I mean, maybe that's unfair of me, but I had a really strong connection with 10. But
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, especially if you really latched onto that album, it makes sense
Mhm.
to see these as lesser follow ups. I will say that I think the songs on Verses have a compactness that isn't there in 10. 10 is very sprawling. Like the songs are quite
Mm.
long, but they're also sort of mid tempo, all of them. Whereas, I mean, compare Animal, the Pearl Jam, the Versus song Animal, to the most closely related 10 song, which would be, I guess, Even Flow. The riffs are very similar,
Mhm.
but Animal is a lot more compact. It's a lot shorter, and it feels like, I don't know. There's something about it that's less grand. 10 to me has this air of grandeur, and I think maybe it's the production is part of it, because 10 has a lot of reverb. The original version, of course, it was
Yeah,
later
it's very
remixed.
spacious.
It is very spacious, correct. Whereas Versus feels a little bit more locked in. But I get what you're hearing with this song in particular with Daughter. Uh, Also helps that this song is also very bass forward. Jeff Ament is there playing his fretless bass, and it sounds very nice, and it has got this big wobbling feeling to it. One thing about Daughter that is similar to Even Flow, actually, is that it's become a concert staple, where the part where he goes, the shades go down, near the end, where the darkness starts creeping in what is an otherwise not very dark song musically. They stretch that out a lot, and it usually becomes a long jam where they start quoting other songs. In fact, my very first Pearl Jam purchase, the very first time I bought anything related to Pearl Jam, was a live album. Pearl Jam released all the shows from their 2000 tour as they call them bootlegs, but they're
Mhm.
live CDs. And I purchased one in Sweden. They played a show in Sweden. Why did I purchase that one? I can't remember. I think I just looked at a bunch of them that were in Tower Records, and I picked the one with the track list that seemed most interesting to me. I remember. I was looking for one that had Jeremy on it. They didn't play Jeremy a lot in those years, and they did in this
Mm.
one. So I picked this one, and the version of Daughter that they play on that live album, they incorporate "The Wrong Child" by REM.
Mm.
They quote the Wrong Child, and it becomes this like spooky, psychedelic jam session.
Sounds really cool. I wanna listen to that.
It is great, to the point where I was actually a little, a little disappointed when I actually listened to the real studio version and realized that that was not part of that song. It was just a thing they added later. And I think Daughter also has a strong presence on media. There are a lot of
Mm.
movies and TV shows that feature Daughter prominently. And I think it's like you said, after they licensed Yellow Ledbetter, they're like, oh man, we could make money off of this. Like the dam broke and they started licensing their music all over the place. And I've definitely caught Daughter in a bunch of places.
It was just really, like, successful and popular, at least in the US. Like,
Mm-hmm.
I heard it on the radio a lot. I still do hear it on the radio, if I'm listening to a classic rock station or, like, variety, alternative 80s, 90s kind of station.
Yeah.
It gets played a lot. It's definitely, like, it was really successful for them, in terms of, like, how many units it moved and
Mm-hmm.
its places on the charts. It's definitely, like, an important part of their canon.
It was number one on Billboard's mainstream rock tracks for 8 weeks, which is a
That's
lot.
impressive, yeah.
Let's move on to our next and final contender for Pearl Jam's signature song.
She lies and says she's in love with him. Can't find a better man. She dreams in color, she dreams in red. Can't find a better man. She lies and
Better Man. So, Better Man, is one of their, it was actually originally recorded for Verses, but they thought it was a little bit too mainstream,
Hmm.
and we'll talk a little bit more about its mainstreamness in a little bit. But Brendan O'Brien also worked with them on this. Brendan O'Brien has worked with like a ton of people in the
Yeah.
90s. Like he was on Red Hot Chili Peppers, Blood Sugar Sex Magic.
Mm-hmm.
I think we already mentioned Soundgarden and Rage Against the Machine and The Offspring, but like they really kind of got into this groove locked in with him.
Yeah.
And
Definitely
I
one
think
of the architects of the 90s rock sound, for sure.
yeah, for sure. And I think it definitely kind of I think it changed their overall sound as, once they started working with him. I don't know exactly how to describe it, but I think it might go back to that reverb thing that you were talking about within the
Mm-hmm.
production on 10, how it sounds, like, a little bit more, like, closed and, like, crisp.
Yeah.
This song was written by, Eddie Vedder, when he was still in high school, apparently about, or at least inspired by his experiences with his mom and his stepdad.
Mm.
So he thought about, what he wanted to do with the song for a really long time. And originally it wasn't even going to be on an album, but it wound up being on Vitology.
Yeah.
And the version that we hear most commonly was partially done in the studio and partially lifted from live recordings,
Mm-hmm.
from shows that they had previously done, as well as kind of piecing together, different, tracks that they had.
When I tell
Um
you that people collectively lost their mind after years and years of hearing this song, when it finally came out, that a big chunk of the song, pretty much everything after the intro, is a live recording, and people were saying, "No way." Now, I remember this. I was in the message boards talking about
uh,
this. People were saying, "No way, that's not live at all. What do you mean?" And then suddenly you're like, "Guys, it lines up." People were lining up the audio files and listening and comparing. And like, think about it,
wow.
20 years of listening to a song, one of the band's most famous songs too, and suddenly somebody tells you half of this was recorded live, was from a show. People were freaking out. It was really cool to see, actually, um, because it doesn't sound live at all. Like that, the rock part. I'm talking about everything that comes after the intro.
That's interesting.
It doesn't sound live. It sounds like a studio recording, and it has that crispness to it. But yeah, people were losing their minds. I know that, like you said, Ed had this song for a while. I know also that he performed it with his previous band pre Pearl Jam called Bad Radio. If you ever want to have a laugh, check out some of the Bad Radio performances that are online. It's very, very, very pre grunge movement. It's very Red Hot Chili Peppers sounding stuff, more like that kind of funk rock of the late 80s. But yeah, I mean, this song stuck out like a sore thumb with the rest of the Bad Radio material. And eventually, it became a Pearl Jam song. And even though it wasn't released as a single, it became one of their most popular songs because the story is compelling. The chorus has that beautiful melody to it that sounds like it's been around forever. It sounds like it could have been a cover, like one of those rock covers of an old song.
Hmm.
And it also has going for it that whole like, oh, it sounds romantic, but the lyrics are actually dark memeability to it that you also get with Every Breath You Take by the Police, the
Mhm.
conversation that keeps popping up over and over again. I think it's a really cool song. I really like the melody of it and also the chords, especially in the verses. It seemed appealing to me as a novice guitar player because it's the kind of song that is really just one chord shape that you move up and down the neck. And so it's very easy to play as somebody who didn't really know how to play guitar. Um, it's that it's sort of a D chord with an F sharp over it that you kind of move up and down. It even though it's a very simple thing, it has this stately feeling to it. It is unresolved, but it also is elegant. And then for the chorus, it just goes to D, A, and G over and over again. I don't know if the band, I don't know if Ed purposely took this from Save It for Later by the English Beat, but the fact that they often
Hmm.
tag Save It for Later at the end of these performances of Better Man kind of points to the fact they're kind of acknowledging that it's the same chords. It's a good example of this compositional quirk that Ed has, where he writes vocal melodies that very closely mirror the guitar parts.
Mhm.
So he does
Mhm.
this in the verses of Better Man, and then he also does this in a song called Dead Man. He does this on Man of the Hour. He does this on Parting Ways, Thumbing My Way, The End. There's a lot of Ed written songs that are basically just him playing a nice little melody on the guitar and then just singing the exact same melody over it. Um, Again, very simple song, but also very effective and very popular. Better Man is one of those songs that are always going to be in the conversation for Pearl Jam's most famous song, even though it had no music video. It wasn't released as a single.
I mean, it's poppy.
And it is pretty poppy. It is very poppy. That's right. It's a pop rock song for a band that at the time was trying to be weirder and darker, and still they managed to write this perfect pop song. I don't know. I think it's great. I love Better Man.
Yeah, I think it's definitely like a unique song in their sort of career. It definitely stands out to me, both as like a solid pop rock song, but also like it's kind of classic Pearl Jam when you think about the lyrical content, right?
Mhm.
Like, his mommy and daddy issues are on display again,
That's true.
you know.
That's true.
But yeah, my biggest memory of the song is hanging out with a friend of mine from elementary school's family at the dinner table, and they would always say "can't find the butter knife" instead of "can't find a better man."
That's cute. I like that.
Yeah.
I like that.
So, but yeah, Better Man's a solid song. It's definitely like it's unique among
Yeah.
the Pearl Jam offerings.
Do you have any songs that made your short list but didn't make it to contender status? Some honorable mentions.
Yeah, so I have 3.
Let's hear them.
One is Black,
Mm-hmm.
which we talked about a little bit earlier at the beginning of our conversation. That's another pretty mainstream successful song of theirs, and it also has, personal significance for you and I, like, for our
Mm-hmm.
friendship and everything. But I think that it just isn't quite up to, like, the level of, like, cultural significance, as important as our friendship is, right?
Yeah, I
That
know. I know.
that some of
That
the
should be
other
the main
songs are.
barometer.
And then the second one is Last Kiss. That was their most successful song, at least in the United States.
That's true. That is their actual biggest single. It peaked at number 2, which is huge. It's enormous. But it's a cover, right? It's a cover of a 50s rock and roll song, I think. I don't remember the name of the person who wrote it, but it's a pretty simple, straightforward cover. They recorded it for a charity album, I think, or maybe for a holiday single. I'm not quite sure. And then it just happened to become their biggest hit. But I agree with you that it's potentially could be considered a signature song because it's so big, but it's not
Mhm.
representative of what they sound like. I don't think it counts because of that. It's a fluke hit that managed to do a lot of good in the world because it raised a lot of money for charity.
Yeah, that was sort of my thinking too, is that, like, as successful as it was, it really isn't, like you said, representative of
Mm-hmm.
of their the majority of their work and, like, who they are as artists.
Okay.
And then the last one would be Just Breathe.
Oh, interesting. Okay, you went with a very modern one. 2009 Backspacer acoustic
Yes,
ballad with strings. Why didn't you decide that it was a contender?
because I forgot about it.
Okay, okay. I it was actually a late career hit for Pearl Jam. That song was pretty big. I did not include it. I personally did not consider it because it seems too different from what they sound like usually. Again, the twinkly sounds and the strings and the syrupy sentimentality of it. But it's a good call because it was a pretty big song for them. I have one more song to add as a honorable mention, which
Go
is
for it.
Corduroy from 1994 from Vitalogy. It's a song that has been included in pretty much every concert. Like they play it a lot, and it's a song that to me serves as a distillation of everything that Pearl Jam is, both musically and also thematically, with its defiance and its skewering of you know trends and conventions of the mid '90s. But I think it also, even though it's a fan favorite, it lacks the mass recognition you would need to be a signature song. So we got a pretty good list of contenders, and we got a pretty good list of honorable mentions. Let's talk now about what our pick is. And last time around, we agreed. Last time for Brittany, we both picked "Baby One More Time." I am curious if we will agree for Pearl Jam. You want to go first?
Sure. My pick is Yellow Ledbetter.
We disagree.
Oh my
Yay!
god, yay!
It's better. It's better. It's better for the show when we disagree.
Probably.
My pick is "Alive."
Oh, okay.
I think "Alive" is their "Baby One More Time." if it's just too big and too iconic. And Yellow Ledbetter, I think it's a good pick, but I don't think enough people know it. What do you think?
I think that, like, it has this, right, like, this moment in pop culture history that is so important to,
Mm.
admittedly, like I said, like, this, Gen X and, elder millennials, like, white people fandom, like, it's
Mhm.
so important to that
Yeah.
little cachette or whatever, I guess, of people, but,
Yeah.
like, it you have that element, right? It does still get radio play.
It
I
does.
think
It's been
it's
around.
it also, like, has the, social justice sort of like component to it, even
Mhm.
though it was sort of, retconned in, right?
Yeah.
That Pearl Jam and Eddie Vedder in particular is known for.
Mhm.
I mentioned this earlier, like if somebody were to do like a parody of a Pearl Jam song, it would sound like Yellow Ledbetter.
Yeah. And that's where we diverge. I think it's not representative enough. I think there's too much sweetness in Yellow Ledbetter and too much, I don't know, it's too pretty. It's too pretty. I think the Pearl Jam sound, or the platonic ideal of the Pearl Jam sound, is a little grittier, and definitely still includes an element of corniness to it. And I think that element of corniness is present in Alive. I just think it eclipses pretty much every other song they ever did. Although you do make a good point, and also to consider, to add to your argument that I disagree with, they play it at the end of so many of their shows. I mean, what more signature song can you get when it's literally
Mhm.
used as a signature at the end of a document, right? Like they're
Mhm.
signing it off and they're throwing it out into the world and saying goodbye with it. So that's where we stand. You picked Yellow Ledbetter. I picked Alive. What do listeners think? You listening right now, what do you think? Who do you agree with? Or do you think we both got it wrong? Leave us a comment. We want to hear about it. Let us know. We love to hear comments. It means that we're not just talking into the void. People are people are listening to us and participating. It's been so great to talk to you about Pearl Jam. I had a lot of fun.
Yeah, this was great. I always have fun doing this with you, whether it's for the podcast or informally.
Absolutely. Do you want to talk about what our next episode will be about in 2 weeks?
Sure. So in 2 weeks, we are going to talk about a band that I have a little bit more familiarity with. Jorge was deep in the Pearl Jam fandom community for a while, and I know a little bit more about this next artist. They're somewhat controversial. In that their lead singer can be a little bit questionable at times, but we're going to be talking about the 1975 and trying to narrow down what their signature song is
That's
for next
exciting.
time.
I'll be spending the next 2 weeks poring over Wikipedia articles and doing some research, because I do not know almost anything about the 1975, but it's going to be fun to learn about it. And I hope you guys all come along for the ride.
Thanks, y'all.